The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York.
Hello again, it's Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. You've joined us for an episode on guarding the West Gate of Freemasonry, as we're going to take a different approach on the membership onboarding process in Freemasonry, specifically when it comes to men who are interested in joining a Masonic lodge, and really what we could learn from recruiting or talent acquisition. As we've reached out to a special guest for this podcast, first time on the Craftsman Online podcast. He's a member of Masters Lodge number 5. He's the principal consultant and co-founder of PeopleWise, and he is a commanding force in the 120-yard gauge fantasy football league. Brother Chris Wessell, welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Thanks, Mike. I hung in there pretty well last season, but didn't quite make it. But yeah, my team, Sequantum Leap, has it held its own for a fair amount of time. But we'll see how this draft goes.
Yeah. Had to get the fantasy football mention in there with all the credentials. It has to be listed.
Well, it's something to be proud of, I think. And it takes a little bit of work.
It does. It does. Our listener may not know, but Brother Chris and I are both members of the old 17th Masonic District in Albany. And I was telling Chris, like, he is one of the brothers who I know the most about, who I've actually never met in person, which is ironic. You've been a proud member of Masters number 5 for a number of years. Kind of walk us through your Masonic background.
So I think it was 2010 to 11, the kind of window there. I first got I was in a fraternity in college, which I think in general, I kind of gravitated towards, kind of belonging. I was a joiner. I like to be part of stuff, much to my wife's chagrin. I keep signing up for things. And everybody I knew turned out just kind of like, oh, you're part of this too. You're also part of this. Like, oh, that's interesting. And so that was kind of what piqued my interest. And then unfortunately at the time, the kind of prevailing culture of the lodge and in many lodges in general was to kind of sign you up for a bunch of stuff like right away. So of course I did that. And I signed up for all the York Rite bodies, and I started doing Scottish Rite and all this other stuff. And I scaled some of that back a bit because I got a little ahead of myself. And then also I kind of got busy for a little while with my business at the time, and kind of dropped off the map for a couple of years, and then came back with a renewed sense of kind of purpose, in that I kind of evaluated what was important to me. And I felt that like the lodge and the shrine were the two areas I was most interested in. So I scaled back my involvement in the rest. And then I kind of wanted to get really involved in Masters and help shape the path that it was going on. It's not me. There's a lot of people who are involved in this, but I wanted to be a part of helping it to continue to evolve and attract the right people and make it just as great as it can be. And but I wasn't really ready to like step into a line officer, do that progression and sign up for that commitment, which I would take very seriously. That's why I don't sign up for it yet, because I'm not in a position to do it well. But then the candidate selection committee thing kind of came up around the time that the North Star was being introduced. And I was like, oh, I can help with that, right? Because you think about how can you contribute to things. You think there's like time, talent, and treasure, right? In the various nonprofits and things you're involved in. Like you can either contribute your time, you can contribute some of your skills, you can contribute some money, or any combination of the three. And I was like, okay, here's a chance for me to help with some of the stuff I know how to do. And also it's something I take pretty seriously, and it's an honor to be able to be a part of not deciding, but helping us determine who should join and who should, because when you bring new people into an organization, you can either add to or subtract from the environment and the culture, right? And so it's important. And at this point, Dan Deneen and I are co-chairing it the last couple of years. But anyway, that's a very long answer. Sorry.
No, this is great, because For listeners would know of this podcast that there's two lodges, and I told you about this. They're kind of like my Boaz and Jachin of Masonic lodges. And I always look to Masters number 5, and no relation, but Denver Lodge number 5 and Denver, Colorado, of two good examples of lodges, in my opinion, that are performing at a high level, that are something you can look up to. And what's unique about those is that it's the culture of the brotherhood that is the driving force around it. And it kind of goes to my belief, and I'm sure you've heard this as a Freemason, that lodge is not the building, but it's actually the brothers that make up the lodge, that make up the team. So it's really special on this episode that we get into that, because one of the things that I think makes your lodge successful in really moving forward to the future is the fact you have a very selective process for choosing men who are interested in petitioning to your lodge. You don't just take everybody. Can you talk a little bit about that vetting or selection process when it comes to prospects or candidates?
I mean, selective is a term I would use, but I think also probably what I would emphasize the most is consistency and expectation setting, and probably those two. So when I first joined, a lot of times people just kind of got, and this still happens to some extent, and this is no judgment because this is how it was for like a long time. You just sign people up, right? And that has varying levels of stickiness to it, right? Sometimes, and it really leaves it entirely up to that person to kind of shape their Masonic experience from there, relatively unmentored, and just kind of, the people get brought in, they're like, what do I do next? And they kind of drop off. And there are other people who, if they have like the internal drive to seek out more information, they're kind of the only ones that stick around, right? And I am a firm believer, whether you're hiring for a company or recruiting for a lodge, that you need to kind of lay things out a little bit more clearly and set expectations. Yes, is it on you once you've joined to really drive your Masonic experience? Yes. Is it also incumbent on the sponsor and the team bringing you in to give you the proper orientation to understand the basic lay of the land and just give you like a little bit of a roadmap? That's also true. And I think that was lacking a little bit. So we reinforce that recruiting is not just on like the candidate selection committee. The candidate selection committee's job is to shepherd interested candidates through the process, make sure everything happens that's supposed to happen, have a consistent experience for them, et cetera. But really, recruiting at the end of the day is on everyone, right? Now, does that mean if you don't bring a bunch of guys into lodge that you're a bad Mason? No, of course not. But it is on us individually. If we have that friend that we want to bring in and get them involved, like we can't just hand the email address and phone number off to somebody and just kind of hope it works out. Like you got to be involved. And that is where we've seen a lot of success, is when, combined with a sponsor who brings their friend around to events, and I'll get into our events in a bit, introduces them around, then Dan and I will make sure they get an opportunity to meet more people, that they get informed about things that we're doing, that they can get involved in, have more touch points. And between us between Dan and I making sure that everything's happening, it's supposed to be happening, and the sponsor being the driving force that keeps reminding them, hey, come back. Did you have fun? Like introducing around as well. When you have both of those things happening, that's where the best results have come from. And those people that came in by way of that are some of the most involved brothers that we've had.
And this sounds completely different than 99% of other lodges, and nothing against the other lodges, but what tends to happen is because they're struggling with what they believe to be a membership issue, and they're like, hey, we only have 10 active guys that are showing up every month. We need to get more members. And it's like, okay, well, let's find a way to just drive this herd of people in the door. Where I like that Masters has kind of taken a very strategic process of like, okay, we're going to slow down the petitioning process for the lodge. We're going to get you ingrained. We're going to get you to meet the culture. We're going to get you involved so that there's just this natural on-ramp to, you want to be a member, and they just kind of slide into it. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing, because I've always wondered what the secret sauce is in this process.
Yeah, and I'll get into kind of the specifics. So say like the kind of start of it is a brother brings a friend around, and first we invite them. And that's often the case with, I think, a lot of lodges. We also try to pepper in other opportunities for touch points, because I think that for both the candidate and for the members of the lodge, you need a maximum amount of touch points to feel comfortable making this decision, right? So we have a monthly lunch, It's casual. It's the third Monday of every month. Members of the district can feel free to join. We post about it sometimes. It's for our brothers to get together and just have something to look forward to each month. It's casual. We don't have to get dressed up for, but it's also, hey, this is a great opportunity to let someone dip their toe in. Like maybe they don't want to suit up and come to one of our dinners right off the bat, but maybe bring your friend along to lunch and let's, we'll just BS, and there's really no pressure. It's not a big deal. So they get on an email list. We invite them we keep them posted on, hey, the next dinner is coming up. Here's what the menu is going to be. Here's the location. Here's the dress code, just basic expectations, right? Then we make sure that the sponsor and a couple other key people who are going to be there are making sure they're not standing in a corner. We have some ambassadors, if you will, making sure that like they are getting a chance to circulate if it's not happening naturally. So you don't want to invite somebody to something and then have them kind of feel like off to the side. Lunches, we started doing a couple happy hours at a brother-owned bar nearby as well, just a couple times a month. And we've also been doing that to fill in the summertime. So to maintain some consistency, we actually have those on Mondays, second and fourth Mondays, which is our normal meeting night. Throughout the summer, we have those happy hours. And the thought process there is because sometimes we'll have a guy that comes around and it'll be a year before they actually petition. They've just been coming around for a bit, hanging out. And there's some really very involved, great brothers, some that who followed that exact model of like, because our kind of messaging is not pressure. We're like, hey, if this isn't the right time for you, or even the right thing for you, cool. Like when it makes sense, we're here, right? We're not going anywhere, right? So they feel a little more comfortable. I think the cadence of getting them to go to dinners and then in the summertime, the happy hours on that second and fourth Monday on a regular basis, the longer that they're doing that, the more that becomes a habit and then more that becomes an expectation and part of their schedule. When you sign somebody up right off the bat and you're like, hey, here's the membership fee, here's when we meet, blah, blah, blah. They sign, they come in, they do their degrees, and sometimes they fade out. Habits have not been developed. So if you can create a habit of every second and fourth Monday or whatever your lodge meets, that is just kind of that's on their calendar, right? Now, when they join, the likelihood that they will continue to attend with regularity is higher because it's part of their rhythm.
I like what you guys have done. You've basically kind of created the experience that you would have wanted as a candidate or a prospect, and you've made it possible because I'm taking myself out of the knowing I'm already in the Westgate. I've already been through the doors. I've done the knocks. I've taken the obligations. But as an outsider, now going back and thinking, oh yeah, what was it like when I first was showed an interest in a lodge? And I thought Masonry was this well-oiled secret society. And when you finally get in and you find out like you've got brothers that don't even have email addresses or are not on social media, and you have that, and then there's this kind of clunky process where today kids would call it ghosting, where there'll be months where you don't hear from anybody from the lodge and you're like, I was so interested in, are they like not interested in me? And I think one key thing I've picked up here, and I've wrote this note down, is like you have had consistent communication with this individual from day one.
And that's what I say to go back to like, I bring up consistency a lot as a big part of like, it is selective to an extent, but it's also consistent. And with consistent processes, you tend to get consistent results, right? Yeah. So if you have people follow a process that works, the output is likely, not guaranteed, but likely to be more predictable, right?
Right.
That communication thing is big because we get them, on our email list, and the messaging there is not, we're not like taking an email that went to brothers and forwarding it to them. It's separately crafted communication. We don't refer to them as meeting nights. We refer to them as dinners that we're inviting them to, right? Like you could say, oh, we have a dinner and then we have a meeting after, but you can't come to that like that. Or you could just say, hey, we have a dinner at 6:00. You can get there as early as 5:30. There'll probably be some brothers outside smoking cigars or hanging a cocktail. We sit down for dinner at 6:00, and then we head upstairs to do our thing at like 7:30. And at which point you can hang out for a bit or head off and do whatever. And in every single email, there's the menu that's going to be that, because we have had some pretty great menus, especially when it's my favorite is taco night. That's awesome. You just build your own tacos. we have hey, it's got to be a compelling message, right? So it's consistent. They're getting message regularly, but it's also like, hey, we hope you'll join us for this. Here's what we're going to be eating. Here's what time to get there. If you're early, here's something for you to do. Don't forget, this is the dress code, et cetera, et cetera. and short and simple, right? Same thing with like the lunches. Hey, we're having our monthly lunch at BJ's Brew House on Wolf and Central. We will be there from 12 to 2. If you get there a little early, a couple of us might be there. If you stay in a little later, that's fine. If you want to sit down and have a meal and hang out for the whole time, great. If you could just pop in for a half hour and grab a quick lunch and just catch up, that's also fine too, right? Like we're available. So the consistent and then like an inviting tone. And I think that makes a big difference too, because it's like you still do need to attract people, right? Like we don't have the luxury of this like huge funnel of people that we need to like sift through. Like you need to court them, right? They need to feel like they're wanted.
Hey, it's Brother Michael Arce, just jumping in for a quick second here for a quick ask. It's literally going to take seconds. Whatever platform you're listening to the Craftsman Online podcast to right now, this second, either the one in your hand or on the computer screen in front of you, open up and give us some feedback. Give us a review, give us a comment, give us a like, whatever it is. Those ratings, your interaction really helps us connect with other men or people interested in Freemasonry in finding our content in their life. That's all I'm going to ask for. A quick little like, a 5-star review, maybe a comment would be nice. And we thank you in advance. Now, let's get back to the show. Brother Chris, there's been 2 terms that we've used, and I just kind of want to reset them for our listener that's like, guarding the West Gate, and what is this North Star? I think most brothers have heard the concept, guarding the West Gate. When I first heard it, I was newly raised or master mason, and I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna get a security system for the lodge. That's probably a good idea. Like, I had no idea what they were talking about. Honestly, the other part of it was I thought it was maybe like some sort of military or veterans group that existed, or like a police force for masons. I had no idea what the whole concept of guarding the West Gate is. And what it's become now is there's actually a process that in New York State and many other jurisdictions have. This is where they run a background check on prospective members. And as part of submitting your petition, you also have to fill out this background check. And you determine, based on the outcome of what comes, whether you want to continue with the process or not, based on the information that comes. My guess is that Masters number 5 has had very few surprises, let's say, with brothers who have gone through that guarding the West Gate process, because you've done such an efficient job of keeping that constant communication. Anything that would be a trouble spot or a pain point, you've already kind of addressed that before they get to that process, right?
I say that's largely true. And I think, again, that goes back to a consistently applied process and quite a few touch points, because then there's the opportunity to have conversations, to explore things. So we follow, once we get someone engaged, and let's say they've been coming around for a bit, we don't have a completely firm, but general requirement of we want them to at least have come to 3 or 4 dinners and maybe social events, whatever. We don't want to have someone who just, but that's why we also try to provide a lot of opportunities throughout the month for that to happen. Let's say you're ready to move forward. Okay. So first thing we have you do is a statement of beliefs that we have them acknowledge, which walks through a dozen or so kind of fundamental shared beliefs that basically communicates, hey, these are our organizational values. One of the things that we talk about with candidates all the time, and we share our personal stories of, hey, like it's fascinating when you get into masonry and you meet all kinds of people you never would have met otherwise, because you're from all different walks of life and do different things and just never would have bumped into each other and been in each other's circles, but you have this common ground of a shared value system, right? And so this is that expectation setting of like, here is that shared value system. And I think that text originally came from maybe some North Star materials, but and we don't use the term North Star at all, even though it's behind the scenes. We don't use that with candidates because that doesn't mean anything to them, right?
Right. Weren't they a hockey team?
Yeah, exactly. So we have them we first have them acknowledge that. That's something that they read and sign. And it gets into, let's say, like, for example, like, hey, masonry isn't for professional networking. It's, if that's your goal, like you're going to be disappointed, right? Mm-hmm. It's, now that said, we say, listen, or, relationships develop. Sure. Do people do business with each other, hire each other, things like that? Absolutely. But that's a byproduct of, right, of that. And so quite a few statements kind of along those lines. And just as a first step of like knowing what you're getting into, and also being able to say, hey, like, you acknowledged this information, right, at some point. Mm-hmm. And then what we have them do is at that same time we have them do the background check. We send them the link to do that. We explain the premise behind that. We're careful to explain that, listen, even though it says it in the small print, I want to make sure I share it with them that, like, listen, this is not like widely shared information within the lodge. There are a couple people, myself, the master of the lodge, and maybe one or two other officers who might even view this information. We only get the cover page that basically says there's positive or negative info. We don't get all sorts of detail. And certainly that, much like kind of an employee file, is not just like handed around the lodge to look at. That is, we express to them that this is confidential information that we have like very specific parameters around access to, which does make them comfortable, because even if they have nothing to hide, in terms of a background, they might also have concerns about like privacy, right?
Yep.
And that's why we tell them, hey, listen, you're going to do this through this provider. Then you're just going to you're going to send us, you're controlling the flow of this information, right? And I think that's very important to address up front, because people would have like privacy concerns.
Oh yeah.
So we have them take that, which just of course takes a couple minutes. We ask them to write a letter of introduction, which sometimes we call different things: letter of introduction, letter of introspection, et cetera, and explain to them that really the goal there is, when we read your petition in lodge, because you kind of explain to them like what's going to happen, right? So like, you're going to fill out this petition, but this petition is very basic biographical information. It doesn't really say a lot about you. Like, it says basic stuff, right? But it's like filling out a job application.
It's like the back of your baseball card, basically, pretty much. Yeah.
Pretty much. So like, when we read in lodge that you have, we just read through your name and your address and who you know and what you do, and, that you acknowledge like the following things. That's just part of the puzzle. So I explained to them, like, think about this as almost like the cover letter that accompanies a resume or something, right? This is your introduction. This is your opportunity, because this is going to be read in lodge, and not everyone will have had a chance to meet you. Quite a few will have, but this is for the benefit of some of them that had a chance to meet you and didn't get a chance to talk to you as much, or some that haven't at all. This is your intro, and this is going to be read to everyone. So don't make it too long, so go easy on the people that have to read them, but like, tell us about you and what motivated you to go this path, right? Because everybody's got different reasons for wanting to join. All of us have different aspects of Masonry that are more important to us than others that like resonated with us. Like, we want to know what that is for you. We want to know, like, sometimes they were like legacies. Sometimes they were just curious about it because like their grandfather was, or something like that. And a lot of really interesting information gets shared there. So we asked them to write that. Then we do have one more kind of like investigative committee meeting that's kind of required to do. At which point that's when we have them fill out the petition and sign it, because one of the things, although we'll do like the statement of beliefs electronically, and certainly if you email me like a PDF of the letter, like that's fine, but we still do stick to like the tradition of the original signed copy of the petition. So that last like lunch or dinner or what have you, where we also invite them, like, listen, if you have a spouse, partner, et cetera, invite them. And we've had that happen quite a few times, where we're like, listen, they're going to have questions. And if you bring them along and they can ask those questions, or we can address some of their concerns, then they'll feel more comfortable with you doing this.
It also, what I'm hearing, and when you go, how is this lodge so successful? And it really determines how you define success, but how do they work so well together? And again, it's not that you're selective of the people that are coming into the lodge. That is a natural process. I'm seeing the filter of how everything gets to this outcome, this end result. But the key thing is just that this guy is going through this, and he feels special. He understands this is special. And when you get this group of special people together, really after that point, anything is possible. There's not going to be contention. There's not going to be frustrations. Like, everybody's here for the same reason. When you talk about like-mindedness that exists, this is where I see a real win happening, where it's not a lodge where you have different guys that, and nothing against them, those lodges, but you just have all these different perspectives, and there's issues that even come together with lodge leadership or the future direction of things. And, there's a lot of infighting, for lack of a better term, that can exist.
Often said in both professional and personal context that most disagreement and conflict comes from differing expectations.
Right.
And I think this is no different. So I think that you end up with people who go into something understanding like what they want out of it and what is available to them, because they're not going to all want the same thing, but they're going to know kind of what they're getting into, and and hopefully, as we kind of orient them properly, that thing that they're seeking, we can make sure that they know like where to look for it or who to connect with. Because if somebody comes in and they mention they love fantasy football, of course they're going to put them in touch with our little group. Or like if they're just into different things, like listen, if you want to talk philosophy all night long, we got guys that want to do that. If you just want to go to happy hour, go to lunch, that's something. If you're really into the historical aspects, like we got here, talk to these guys. So there are still like pockets of people within the lodge that have like specific interests, but at the same time, we're not siloed. We're not talking to each other. We all have shared values. We overlap a lot, but you still kind of find like your people within the group. Again, it is what you make of it, and it should be largely like a self-guided adventure at some point, but you got to show somebody the map first.
So we don't talk about recruitment in Freemasonry, which I kind of wish we did, because then it didn't have such the negative context to it. We should definitely be talking about retention. I think that that's a big problem that we have. And one of my favorite books, I'm staring at the title right now, is The First 90 Days. We're setting up that plan to success. Do we have something? Does Masters 5 have something? And this is a key moment, like after the guy is raised to that sublime degree of Master Mason, do you just kind of tap them on the back? I'm sure you don't say, all right, good luck with the rest of the craft. Or is there a follow through that happens afterwards?
We started first with the beginning of the funnel, really figuring out like a lot of what I've talked about, which is we've really gotten that down to a process and a science. And similarly, the path from first through third degrees of consistent communication, sponsor involvement, helping them study, memorization and that kind of stuff. We, I think, do a pretty decent job from raising onward, but I would say our process is not as refined and formal there. And I think that's like the next opportunity for us. Like, I think that because all the steps that preceded, like our engagement is higher and the guys are coming around and they're organically more involved. But I would say, we haven't got it all figured out. And I think that we've been fortunate because the steps leading up to that have maybe put them in a better position to be successful. But I think maybe a next logical evolution for us is to think about, okay, can we formalize to some extent a framework that follows them for like the first year to just get them even more acclimated. So I think there's opportunity there.
I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're getting close to the hour that we set aside, so I'll get you out of here on this question, Brother Chris. And it actually came from a listener of the podcast, which I never really share our email address, but it's info@craftsmanonline.com. Don't worry, I'll tuck that in the show link. So if you're driving or running, you don't have to like trip over anything or hit somebody. But he asked a valid question. He said, and this spurred the whole joining and guarding the West Gate conversation. He said, quote, "How is it that some bad eggs slip through and become Freemasons?" And from what you've described with your extensive process that is a continuous experiment at Masters number 5 and has produced some very successful outcomes, how would you answer that question? These bad eggs or bad apples that sometimes do slip through that guarding the West Gate.
As I kind of alluded to early on, consistent processes tend to produce consistent or at least predictable results, but not perfect, right? From the hires I've been involved in over the last 20 years for hundreds of different companies, and also just the recruiting involvement, if you will, I've had with Masters, where you get kind of bad eggs, there's a couple of points of failure to consider. One is not enough contact. Right. Like if you just rubber stamp somebody in, like you don't have enough information, you don't know anything about them, you don't know their intentions, you don't know you don't have enough, you don't know. Right. So rushing the process will definitely increase the likelihood of bad eggs. Relying too heavily on, let's say, like guarding the West Gate example, like the background check, it is a piece of the puzzle, but you don't want to give it too much weight. It is one data point, right? Just because they don't have a background doesn't mean that they have good intentions. So also, the flip side of that is, and I know this from growing up in Schenectady, and a lot of my friends been through the legal system and things like that, and I witnessed it firsthand a ton of times. Just because the flip side is just because someone does have a background doesn't mean that they have bad intentions either. So I do want to make sure I vouch for that, because we don't we don't not take someone who has some kind of history. There's a lot of context there, right? And there's a lot to talk about. So yeah, you could have someone who has a squeaky clean background. Then you're like, okay, well, he must be great. Well, no, we know plenty of people who don't have criminal backgrounds who are not the best people. So if you rely too heavily on that as one of your primary sorting hats, that could lead to the bad eggs too. That's probably the biggest ones, is rushing the process and not having enough touch points and not having enough opportunity to engage and understand about the person. And also maybe becoming a little too reliant on just the background check as like a major source of information. Even if you do both of those things right, sometimes people lie, and that sucks. But I think that if you have enough people talk to a person on enough different occasions and from enough different angles on enough different topics, you can kind of collectively like hive mind whether or not this person is like got good intentions, thanks to those different observations, if that makes sense.
This has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. Big thanks to our guest this week, Brother Chris Wessell. Thank you for making the time to come be a part of it.
Thanks for having me.
If you've enjoyed our podcast and you want to hear more, you can tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online Podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.